Hello, everybody. I'm supposed to give you a wrap-up. Do you know that you just heard 34 speeches all day long? You heard 34 speeches, or anyway, thoughts from 34 people, whether they be speeches or conversations. And you heard from not only an extremely impressive group of people, but just think about the diversity of all the topics that you heard about today. And I'm going to summarize all of this. Yeah, right. So these are my notes, that I took throughout the day. Of course, you can't read them. So what was going through my mind as I was listening to all these talks throughout the day? And I was thinking about how, what is the one theme that cuts across all these topics as diverse as they are? And some people talked about the great challenges they were experiencing and the frustrations that they had, and other people were talking about the great opportunities that they were forming or creating or taking advantage of. And I was thinking to myself, well, when was the last time when we saw such amazing change that happened not just in one particular society, but across the entire world? And I was thinking, well, maybe it was the printing press, perhaps? And I looked up the printing press and when it was actually invented, vis-a-vis our new technology, and found out that it was actually invented or disseminated throughout the West anyway in 1439. That's when it actually started by some guy named Johannes Gutenberg. Now, of course, it took a long time before the printing press actually hit our world, but just imagine what our world would be today if it wasn't for the printing press. Can you imagine any aspect of our life today that isn't affected by that? That one invention. Now, there was another invention that started in 1962, at least the initial codes for that began, and then there were a whole bunch of people that were involved, including among which was Al Gore, such that by 1990 came into the world the internet, the worldwide internet. And we're now beginning to see the results, or at least debating about the results of that and how it's changing our lives about 22 years later. So I think we're in the midst of a giant technological revolution vis-a-vis the internet. And if you think about all the talks that you heard today, in one way or another, they are talking about both the direct and indirect effects of that technology and the related technologies to that particular one. And of course, whenever you have a big change in society, that means that there are going to be choices we have to make, because when you have a giant technological revolution, it gives you opportunities and it gives you challenges. And you heard about some of the challenges, you heard about some of the opportunities that it gives us. And what I want to do is sort of step back, think about the opportunities we heard about, think about the challenges that were both said and unsaid today, and just sort of wrap up with some ideas that we can hopefully take away with. And clearly I'm not going to summarize every talk. So what were some themes that I heard? Well, it seems to me, first and foremost, before we even get into the individual themes, we have in this room a set of global leaders. Every single one of us are global leaders. Every single one of us, in one way or another, can affect the future. And that means that every single one of us has to think about what are the opportunities that we are going to create for ourselves and for the collective, and what are some challenges that we're going to have to think deeply about as they unfold and affect the people around us. Some more specific themes that we heard today. Well, first, customization. Think about all the various talks you heard about today. You can make yourself literally. Every single one of us can literally custom make themselves. You can have 1 million, perhaps 1 billion Lady Gagas out there. Every single one of us can completely custom make ourselves through all the products that are out there. So that means we've got a lot of choice. It's a topic that's close to my heart. We have a lot of choice confronting us, and lots of choice can be a good thing, but can also be a bad thing, particularly if you don't know what you want and can't find what you think you might want. But customization also can lead us to actually have less choice, more meaningful choices, right? If you think about things like Amazon or Netflix or, Guilt or any of these kinds of services that can help us actually tell us, based on our history, what kinds of things we might like. And that's potentially a good thing for us in terms of choice. And I think on the customization front, there's probably a lot more room for more innovation, more adaptation. You're going to see a lot more change. We've only begun to scratch the surface on that. Then you also heard a lot on specialization, right? That, there's a lot of information out there, and we can take advantage of this information. So as an organization like Tesco, I can collect so much data that I didn't collect in the past. And you know what? I can do a lot with that data. Well, each student, whether it be a child in school, whether it be a student in a university, we can completely individualize his or her education. We can specialize them. We can specialize it to the degree that, as they're learning, I can see what they're learning, what they're not learning, and I can adapt accordingly and make sure you're learning what you need to learn. Okay, well, that's specialization to a highest degree, and that could be really cool. We also heard specialization in the form of, from Brian Johnson, in the form of potentially having a chip, that we can just swallow in our mouth, and it's like sitting there somewhere in our bodies, and it tells every doctor our entire medical history and potentially tells every professor exactly what we know and what we don't know. Seems like an interesting world. Well, what are the challenges of customization and specialization? It's great, but it'll mean that every single one of us will have to know what we want. And that's not easy. Most of us don't know what we want. Most of us, know if we think somebody's hot tonight, but then by tomorrow morning we're kind of wondering about our sanity. Right? So our notions of what we want are constantly changing. Also, information. If we all become really, really specialized in our work lives, in our customer lives, in our general knowledge, if every single one of us has a niche knowledge base, and there's all this data out there in the world, well, then it starts to become, well, wait a minute, do I know what information I need when I need it? Do I know where to find it? Maybe that's why we have all these interesting faux pas and serious crises that many of our CEOs made because they happen to not know vital information. It's an awful lot of information to keep track of. All right, so customization, specialization, a lot of potential out there. We're all trying to make the world better, but these are some things to think about. I myself am also venturing out and creating a website that's designed to help people specialize in their skill set towards becoming global leadership, developing leadership skills. The second big theme you heard today, in lots of different ways, has to do with the power of connections, right? Whether it be connecting ideas from all over the place, creating a network of data from all over the place, or a network of people, and might even be people and ideas when you think about, the borderless scientists, or scientists without borders, I believe it's called. And so what is that all about? Well, it says, look, you should open your mind to lots and lots of different ideas, and as you open your mind to lots and lots of different ideas, well, now you'll become more creative. That's what creative people do. And if you get to know people, don't ever eat lunch alone, and also make sure that you don't eat with people that are like you. Well, that means that you're going to meet lots of people from lots of different places and constantly be expanding your mind. And this is a great thing because I can find people that can teach me about all sorts of things, and I can become a member of lots and lots and lots of different groups. It's why we come to events like this. We're going to go network, and we know that networking is a good thing. And we know that we should be networking and getting to know more and more and more people. But is more better? Right? Right now our assumption is more and more and more and more and more, and of course, more is better. But what I want to suggest to you is perhaps, like choice, it's going to become an overload issue. I've got this stack of cards. Let me open up this first card. Jagdish Bhagwati. I think he was shortlisted for the Nobel. Better hold on to that card. Tom Malone. Oh, I think, you know what? He talked about jobs. He might be able to help me get a job. Better keep that card. And you're going to have, and then you might see, let's say, Sheena Iyengar. Too long, forget that. It probably has to do with yoga anyway. My point is that we don't know what to do with those cards. So often we don't know what our network includes, we don't know what we need. And that maybe a different way to think about networking as our options grow is rather than thinking more is better, maybe we want to think about the idea of smarter is better. What do we need? The third theme we heard today was this idea of a borderless world, right? We mainly heard this in the morning. Right? We heard this when we discussed things like outsourcing. Is outsourcing a bad thing or a good thing? We heard this when we heard about things like immigration policy. Should we actually allow these foreigners visas or green cards, or should we send them away? You know, how good is it for us to, have this situation where we can all connect with people all around the globe? So let's imagine a world in which a company can list itself wherever it wants, produce its product in another place, then sell its product in yet other places, and have its employees form a grid all over the world. Let's call it a global organization. Right? Imagine companies like that. In fact, don't just imagine for-profit companies like that. Imagine communities, not-for-profit organizations, all kinds of communities like that. Why? That would be, in some ways, really great, right? We could form whatever we want, whatever identity we want. We could travel the world. We could become culturally intelligent. It could be a great life. And you could imagine that as a result of that, the nation state becomes weaker. In fact, you're already seeing that, right? Things like the Arab Spring. Things like the fact that the American tax policy doesn't just get affected by our views domestically, it gets affected by what's going to happen around the globe, right? So you could imagine that the nation state's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker, and maybe other organizations might become even more powerful than the nation state. So old infrastructures become weak, new infrastructures become strong. Nation state might give way to, I don't know, maybe let's call it a corporocracy. Imagine if you had the Fortune 1000 companies, which were global organizations that were running the world. And imagine that those Fortune 1000 companies ran the world. Their economy was actually greater than any economy, had more power than any single nation. By the way, that's not that off. Walmart's revenues is the equivalent of the 25th largest economy in the world. Think of Walmart Nation. Right? So what would that world look like? Right? You could imagine that with technology, we could become a more globalized world, and we don't need borders like something silly like a nation. Would that lead to more inequality, more inequities, more haves and have-nots, or maybe just a different kind of haves and have-nots? So the final thought I had was that in some ways, if you think about all the talks that we heard today, there's a giant contradiction put before us. And that is that on the one hand, we are becoming more and more individualistic, right? More and more than any other time in our world's history, we can now form who we want to be. We can imagine our futures in terms of ourselves and in terms of our worlds. At the same time, our need to act collectively, to make decisions collectively, is also more intense, more acute today than ever before. If you think about our human history, we started off as tribes. And then, as our network expanded, we became bigger and bigger and bigger until we got to the point of a city-state. Then as our networks expanded yet again, we became bigger and bigger until we got to a nation-state. Now we've potentially become so big that we've reached our final destination called the globe. And we suddenly have these massive challenges put before us like, well, the global economy. One thing happens in one place, it ripples everywhere else. Or global warming. We might just get obliterated someday. How are we going to deal with those challenges? Now, you might say that this contradiction between individualism and collectivism is just so profound that maybe it's not a contradiction. That that it's only because of the progress and success of the collective. That's the reason why we suddenly have the opportunity to be as individualistic as we are today. I'm reminded of Immanuel Kant, who said that the big challenge facing collective decision makers is that they have to somehow value the individual human in terms of ends rather than means. So that means we have to make compromises. So, as global leaders, I think one of the things we really need to think about is how we're going to be honest and transparent about the trade-offs associated with this ongoing tension between individualism and collectivism. And it's only as we are honest about those trade-offs that we'll begin to be able to give more people voice. Actually create an environment where there is more democracy, where there is more opportunity for everyone. And I think it's only then that we will finally believe what our leaders tell us. Thank you very much, and now is time for drinks.